I know the topic of this video is divisive. You're either here because you wholeheartedly agree that practical effects are the be-all end-all, or because you've already scrolled down and are launching a tirade on the advantages of CGI in the comments. Rest easy, however, as I am here to talk about a movie that clarified the way in which I believe these two mediums are meant to coincide. And that movie is M3gan. I went into the new thriller from James Wan and BLUMHOUSE with very low expectations, but left pretty pleased. The story was interesting, the overall metaphor was strong, and the writing was certainly not as atrocious as I usually find it to be in BLUMHOUSE films. But when I left the theater, the thing I thought about more than anything else was that every time M3gan was on screen, I fundamentally believed that she was a robotic doll companion. Even knowing she was played by a real actress didn't shatter the illusion for me. And I believe the secret to this incredible effect is that essentially everything about her was done practically, with VFX being used as a supplement to fill in the gaps. This crystallized for me that I believe the ideal effects practice for films is doing what can be done for real, and using CGI for the things that can't, or to supplement what was already accomplished practically. When James Wan and Jason Blum concocted the idea for the movie, they were instantly confronted by the challenge of how to bring this robotic doll to life on the screen. They'd made a movie where a robot is the main character, which means it needs to be able to accomplish quite a few things in order to captivate an audience. She needs to be able to give dialogue with matching facial expressions, be able to convey feelings without words, be able to move like a real girl, and look real enough to fit in the uncanny valley that the movie is going for. Now, the studio could have created M3gan entirely with VFX, rigging up a model and doing the traditional talk to a tennis ball technique where M3gan is added in later. This would allow them to satisfy the first and second conditions, as a CG M3gan could articulate her face in whatever ways necessary, allowing her to potentially provide an excellent emotional performance. However, making CG characters move like real people is one of the many big challenges that VFX artists face, and making her look real enough to fit in the uncanny valley would place even more strain on those artists. So the third and fourth requirements are a bigger problem. Additionally, the movie only had a $12 million budget, which is remarkably low for a mainstream film these days, with other January 2023 movies like The Pale Blue Eye and Plane costing $72 million and $25 million respectively, and huge blockbusters like Avatar 2 costing $250 million. Paying for the VFX work necessary to satisfy the conditions M3gan required would doubtless have blown the budget. Their genius solution to this M3gan problem was a combination of three things: puppetry, animatronics, and Amy Donald, the real actress that performed whenever M3gan was moving in a complex way. First and foremost, they actually created a full-size animatronic doll. The puppet's face was rigged to be able to move and create expressions, but this had to be controlled remotely and was not automated. The rest of the puppet was articulated, requiring puppeteer Paul Lewis to manually contort her in order to provide a full performance in close-ups and dialogue scenes. In wide shots, or scenes which required M3gan to do anything beyond minor facial or arm articulations, Amy performed, mimicking a robot's sharp, calculated movements. She wore a silicone mask to mimic the texture of the puppet and had her face digitally replaced. The main CG involved with M3gan on screen was this digital face replacement, with only a few scenes in the entire movie having a fully digital M3gan. They didn't even paint out the puppeteer, opting instead to hide him from view with clever camera angles. Another movie I feel nailed this combination was Guillermo Del Toro's The Shape of Water. With only a $19.5 million budget, it falls in the same range as M3gan, and, like M3gan, it boasts a fantastically believable creature who is, of course, primarily practical. In fact, much of the time, the only digital work done to the merman was also a digital face replacement for the upper portion of the face. When the creature was fully submerged or had to give a particularly complex performance, a full VFX creature was created. The result of both of these decisions is a creature that feels as real as any other person in the scene. When I watch Thanos talk to Iron Man, I don't buy that these two characters are on a stage together speaking. And to be clear, Thanos is one of the best performance capture performances ever put to screen, and the big Marvel movies have some of the best VFX in the industry. But it just doesn't feel like two real characters on screen the way it does when the character is made practically. J.R.R. Tolkien once wrote a letter in which he described the difference between the willing suspension of disbelief and the magic of being truly enraptured in a secondary world. That, to me, is a fantastic metaphor for the difference here, When I watched Infinity War, I willingly suspended my disbelief to participate in the Marvel Universe. But when I watched M3gan and Shape of Water, my brain didn't even bother deciding if the character was real or not. It automatically accepted these characters as being part of that very real, secondary world. This is partially due to how good our brains are at determining the difference between CG and reality. But another important factor is that when a character is practical, the rest of the cast actually has someone to interact with. Actors have continuously lamented the challenges of acting to a tennis ball in a full green screen set, and it's not hard to imagine why. A large part of acting is connecting with the emotion and energy of the people you're acting with. The subtle ways your co-star reacts to your words, the way they move, the way they change up their tone, how that affects the way you feel. All of these things come together to create a performance that feels true. It's something the actors can feel, and it's something the audience notices. Watching Ian McKellen have an existential crisis on the set of the Hobbit movies as he sits alone in a room attempting to give a great performance is all you need to see to understand the benefit that having a character in the room with you confers. When Allison Williams is talking to M3gan, the animatronic doll speaks back, narrows her eyes, tilts her head. When Sally Hawkins is talking to the merman, he reaches out and touches her. He recoils, he reacts spontaneously. These characters respond much like any other actor would, and I have to imagine that this makes it easier to get a good performance. A final consideration is the overworking of VFX artists, which is becoming more and more of a hot-button issue. The use of practical effects wherever possible takes some of the pressure off of the VFX artists and redistributes it across the rest of the production team. Instead of VFX artists being responsible for the entirety of M3gan, from the performance to the animation to the design, you now have a wardrobe designer create M3gan's outfit, a puppeteer control her movement, an animatronics team control her facial expressions, an actress give the performance, and a VFX artist worry about adding in a digital face where it matters and smoothing all the edges. At the very least, this gives VFX artists the time to focus on doing one thing very well, probably resulting in a better final product anyway. This is by no means a rant about VFX being terrible and practical effects reigning supreme, but rather a dissertation on where I believe these tools should fit in the larger tool belt of movie effects. Using VFX to digitally replace M3gan's face when Amy McDonald was acting was probably a better choice than attempting to create a mask that actually held up to close inspection and still allowed Amy to see and perform at the level she did. And the few scenes where M3gan was actually full CG probably made sense too. Guillermo Del Toro, who is an outspoken fan of the practical, was very open to the use of VFX on Shape of Water when it made sense from a visual and budget perspective. When filming the dry for wet scenes for the movie, the traditional method of getting watery hair movement is to film at high speed with a fan blowing the hair. But Guillermo wanted more control over the motion and the rhythm of the water, so he chose to utilize VFX. The point here is that there is a symbiotic way in which these tools can interact, a spectrum of practical to CG that can shift based on the shot required. What I find very fascinating is the difference that money and available technology seem to play in this dilemma. The Lord of the Rings trilogy was created with a total budget of about $300 million. It had some of the most incredible costume and makeup work ever done, unbelievably clever camera tricks to cut between doubles and main actors, full-size sets and hyper-detailed miniatures, perspective tricks to create size discrepancies between the races, and incredible choices of location. VFX technology was quite literally being invented for the movies as the trilogy went on, but the limitations presented by the technology available at the time and the budget they were working with required them to use creative problem solving to develop the shots they were looking for. The result was a trilogy of films whose effects still stand up more than 2 decades later. The Hobbit movies, on the other hand, cost over twice as much and had access to levels of VFX technology that are miles ahead of what was available to the team during Lord of the Rings. But the result is a world that feels less real, less grounded, and characters that I have to willingly suspend my disbelief to accept. There's a strong case to be made that the shift toward the overuse of VFX has a lot to do with studio interference. VFX allows a far greater level of control over the production process. Production can take place all in one location, there's less risk of injury since stunts can be performed on green screen sets onto soft mats, and there's a greater level of control in post-production that studios can use to tweak the things they don't like. VFX technology allows the movie production process to be made more streamlined and cookie-cutter than ever before. But I think there's another, more subtle reason why access to budget and technology can sometimes upset the perfect balance between the practical and the digital. And I think this quote from Guillermo del Toro discussing The Shape of Water sums it up. But we hope that stuff just disappears, and people just remember the creature's performance, and remember Sally's performance, and just focus on that part. There's a lot of crazy tech there, but in the end, it always comes back to the creature for us. It always comes back to the creature is just another way of saying it always comes back to the characters. When you have a limited set of tools at your disposal that can be used to create the world and characters in your story, you're forced to cut back to just the essentials: the story, the characters themselves, and their relationships. And these are the elements that make a good movie anyway, and being forced to focus on them might just be a blessing in disguise. When the budget and tech are available to create anything you want, it seems like it's pretty easy to lose sight of the reason you were telling the story in the first place. Seeing a movie like M3gan have mainstream success and be recognized for its effects gives me hope. And seeing a bigger budget movie like Top Gun Maverick, for example, strike the same balance makes me even more confident that we might be seeing the start of a new era in filmmaking, where we see directors narrow in on that golden balance and we have more and more experiences where we can get lost in that secondary world without even an inkling of disbelief to suspend.